The Donor's Hour. Dr. Sam Adams moved through the chaos of the ER with the calm, predatory grace of a shark. He was a transplant surgeon, one of the best in the country, and he operated with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. To his residents, he was a god. To the hospital administration, he was a lawsuit waiting to happen. He didn't just bend the rules, he often acted as if they didn't apply to him, especially when a patient's life was on the line. His latest act of procedural rebellion, authorizing a high-risk experimental anti-rejection therapy without prior board approval, had saved a man's life and resulted in a mandatory, strongly worded meeting with the hospital's new chief of medical ethics, Dr. Eve Ramsey. He walked into her office expecting a stuffy, gray-haired administrator. Instead, he found a woman his own age, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a posture that radiated an unshakable, steely composure. She didn't invite him to sit. "Dr. Adams," she began, her voice cool and precise, "I've read your file. It reads less like a surgeon's record and more like a series of successful, high-stakes gambles. You are brilliant. You are reckless, and my job is to protect this hospital from the consequences of both." "My job is to save lives, Dr. Ramsey," he countered, leaning against the door frame, his stance deliberately casual. "Sometimes that requires moving faster than a committee meeting." "The protocols are in place for a reason," she said, her gaze unwavering. "They protect the patients, they protect the staff, and they protect the institution that allows you to perform your miracles. You are not a god, doctor. You are an employee." He saw her then not just as a bureaucrat, but as a formidable opponent. She was as unyielding as he was audacious. Their first meeting was a declaration of war, a clash of two fundamentally opposed philosophies. He was the cowboy, she was the rulebook, and the hospital wasn't big enough for both of them. Their paths crossed constantly in the weeks that followed. They battled in ethics committee meetings, their arguments a precise, intellectual duel. He would argue for the individual, the desperate case on the table. She would argue for the greater good, the long-term integrity of their medical standards. They were a perfect, frustrating match. He learned to respect her mind, her ability to dismantle his passionate arguments with cold, undeniable logic. She, in turn, began to see flashes of the man behind the arrogance, the genuine empathy he had for his patients, the profound weight of the life and death decisions he carried every day. Their professional animosity was slowly, reluctantly being infused with a current of mutual respect. The case that would change everything arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. A 9-year-old girl named Lily, with a rare congenital heart defect, was admitted in critical condition. Her heart was failing, rapidly. Her only hope was a transplant, but her blood type was rare, and she was small. The chances of finding a matching donor in time were slim to none. Sam took on the case with a fierce, personal determination. He saw in Lily's frightened eyes the reason he did his job. Eve, in her capacity, monitored the case closely, her professional concern warring with her distrust of Sam's methods. They found themselves working late one night, the only two people left in the surgical wing's quiet lounge. They were poring over Lily's charts, the unspoken truce of a shared, desperate goal hanging between them. "We're running out of time," Sam said, the usual confidence gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, weary frustration. "Every hour, her heart gets weaker." "The search has been escalated to the National Registry," Eve said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "We're doing everything by the book." "The book is going to kill her," he said, looking at her, his eyes full of a fire she was beginning to understand. "Sometimes you have to be willing to tear out a page to save a life." Before she could form a rebuttal, his pager rang off, a frantic, urgent summons. A potential donor heart had just become available. A helicopter was en route. A surge of pure, unadulterated hope shot through the room. It was a miracle. But as the initial report came in from the donor hospital, the miracle began to look like a curse. The donor was a John Doe, a victim of a hit and run. His medical history was a complete blank. Standard protocol for an unknown donor history, especially with a pediatric recipient, was a mandatory 48-hour quarantine and extensive testing for any latent diseases. It was a 48-hour delay Lily didn't have. She had maybe 6 hours. Sam looked at Eve, his face a hard mask of determination. He was going to argue to waive the protocol. He was going to demand they use the heart, risk and all. And she, as the chief of medical ethics, was the only person who could authorize it or deny it. Their philosophical war had just been given a name and a face, and the life of a 9-year-old girl was now caught in the crossfire.
The Emergency Ethics Committee meeting was convened in a sterile, windowless boardroom that felt more like an interrogation chamber. It was 3 a.m. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. At the head of the long table sat Eve, her face a calm, composed mask that betrayed none of the turmoil raging within her. Sam stood at the opposite end, his energy a restless, caged animal prowl. He made his case with a raw, passionate urgency. He laid out Lily's deteriorating vitals, the rapidly closing window of opportunity. "We're talking about a child's life," he said, his voice resonating with a power that had nothing to do with arrogance. "A child who will be dead by morning if we follow a protocol designed for hypotheticals. This is not a hypothetical. This is a reality." Then it was Eve's turn. She spoke with a quiet, unshakable logic. She presented the risks. The unknown donor could have been a carrier for a dozen diseases: HIV, hepatitis, rare viruses that wouldn't show up on a rapid screen. If we transplant a compromised organ into a 9-year-old girl, we are not saving her, we are sentencing her to a different, potentially more agonizing death. She looked at the other board members, her gaze steady. "Our first duty is to do no harm, and the potential for catastrophic harm here is immense. The protocol exists to prevent these very tragedies." It was a perfect textbook argument. It was rational, it was ethical, and it was unassailable. And it was going to kill Lily. The board was split. The older, more conservative doctors sided with Eve. The younger, more aggressive surgeons sided with Sam. The deadlock was absolute. As the chief of ethics, the final decision fell to Eve. "We will adhere to the 48-hour quarantine," she announced, her voice as firm and unyielding as stone. "The risk is too great." A collective sigh of resignation went through half the room. Sam just stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and pure, undiluted fury. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he just gave her one long, searing look of condemnation, turned and walked out of the room. The look was worse than any argument. It said, "You've just killed her." She maintained her composure until the room was empty. The moment the door clicked shut, her facade crumbled. She sank into her chair, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. She had made the right call, the only call she could have made, but it felt like a moral failure. She found Sam an hour later, standing outside Lily's room in the ICU, looking through the glass. The girl was so small in the large hospital bed, a fragile bird tangled in a nest of wires and tubes. "I made the only decision I could," Eve said softly, coming to stand beside him. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on Lily. "That's the difference between you and me, Eve," he said, his voice a low, bitter rasp. "You see decisions. I see a 9-year-old girl who is going to die because of a rule book." "And what would you have me do, Sam?" she shot back, her own control finally snapping. "Gamble with her life on a feeling? Abandon every standard we have because it's emotionally difficult? That's not medicine, that's malpractice." "It's called courage," he retorted, finally turning to face her, his eyes blazing. "It's called being willing to take a risk when the alternative is certain death. You hide behind your protocols because you're afraid. You're afraid of making the wrong call, so you make the safest one, even if it's a death sentence." His words were a scalpel, cutting through her professional defenses and striking something deeply personal. He was wrong, but he was also, terrifyingly, a little bit right. She had built her entire career, her entire identity on the foundation of logic, reason, and the safety of rules. It was her shield against the chaos of the world. "You don't know the first thing about me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know that you'd rather be right than save a life." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the silent antiseptic hallway. She looked through the glass at the sleeping child, then at her own reflection in the window. The confident, composed face of the chief of ethics stared back at her, but for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize the woman she saw. Sam's accusation echoed in her mind. "You're afraid." She stood there for a long time, the war between her head and her heart raging. The rules were clear, the risks were real, but the image of Lily, so small and so fragile, was more powerful than any protocol. With a sudden, heart-stopping clarity, she knew what she had to do. It was reckless, it was career suicide, it was a gamble of epic proportions, and it was the only choice she could live with. She turned and ran down the hall, her footsteps echoing. She had to find Sam. She had to tell him that for once she was going to tear out a page from the rulebook. She was going to tear out the whole damn chapter. Eve found Sam in the surgeon's locker room, staring bleakly at his own reflection in a polished metal locker. He looked defeated, the fire in his eyes reduced to embers. "You were right," she said, her voice breathless from her run down the hall. He turned, his expression wary, expecting another argument. "Right about what?" "About me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "About being afraid, about hiding behind the rules." She took a deep breath, the words feeling foreign and dangerous on her tongue. "I'm overriding the committee's decision. My decision. We're doing the transplant." He stared at her, his exhaustion momentarily replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "Eve, you can't. It's your career. They'll crucify you." "Let them try," she said, a fierce, unfamiliar resolve hardening her features. "You said it yourself. This is a child's life. That's the only thing that matters right now." She looked at him, her gaze direct and unwavering. "But if we do this, we do it together. I will authorize it. I will sign the waivers. I will take the official fall. But I need you to do what you do best. I need you to be the cowboy. And I need you to be perfect." A slow, dawning smile of pure, grudging admiration spread across his face. "Dr. Ramsey," he said, the respect in his voice genuine for the first time. "I do believe you're starting to think like a surgeon." What followed was a controlled, high-stakes conspiracy. Eve used her authority to unlock the doors, while Sam assembled his most trusted surgical team, framing the procedure as a last-ditch experimental auto-perfusion to buy Lily more time, a half-truth that would keep the rest of the hospital from asking too many questions until it was too late. They became a single, efficient unit, their usual antagonism replaced by a seamless, unspoken partnership. She handled the bureaucracy, the logistics, the quiet manipulation of the system she knew so well. He prepped for the most important surgery of his life. In the eye of the storm, they found a strange, exhilarating harmony. Just before he scrubbed in, he found her in the observation gallery overlooking the empty, waiting operating room. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Why did you change your mind?" She looked down at the sterile, blue and steel theater below. "When I was in medical school, my mother was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. There was an experimental treatment, a clinical trial. It was high risk, unproven. The ethics board at her hospital, following protocol, denied her application. They said the potential for harm was too great." She paused. She died 3 months later. The treatment, a year after that, was approved. It's now the standard of care. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes shining with an unshed grief he now understood. "I have spent my entire career building a fortress of rules to protect myself from ever feeling that helpless again.
to believe that if you just followed the right procedure, you can prevent the bad outcomes. She gave a small, sad smile. You were right. I was afraid. I was so afraid of being the person who made the wrong call that I was willing to make no call at all. He didn't say anything. He just reached out, and his hand gently covered hers where it rested on the gallery railing. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of profound human understanding. It was an acknowledgement of the scars they both carried. For what it's worth, he said softly, I think you just made the bravest call of your life. He squeezed her hand once, and then turned and walked toward the scrub room, leaving her alone with his words and the vast, terrifying, and hopeful weight of what they were about to do. She watched him go, this reckless, brilliant man who had, in the course of a single night, forced her to confront her own ghosts. The cowboy and the bureaucrat were about to gamble everything on a single, fragile life. And for the first time, Eve felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be.
The operating room was a world of its own, a sterile bubble of focused silence and controlled tension. Under the harsh white glare of the surgical lights, Sam Adams was no longer a cowboy. He was an artist. His movements were a symphony of precision and economy, his hands moving with a confidence that was almost hypnotic. Eve watched from the observation gallery above, her own hands pressed against the cold glass, feeling a strange mixture of terror and awe. The surgery was a marathon, each hour a tightrope walk over a chasm of potential disaster. The donor heart, once inspected, appeared healthy, but the specter of the unknown haunted every decision. Eve, connected by an earpiece to the head nurse, became Sam's second set of eyes, monitoring the data streams, the blood work, the endless flow of information that was her native language. She fed him the data, and he translated it into action. Their partnership, forged in the boardroom and solidified in a late-night confession, now became a life-saving duet. Platelet count is dropping, she'd say into her mic, her voice calm and steady. Administering factor 7, his voice would reply from below, just as calm. They were in perfect sync, two sides of the same brilliant medical mind. As the hours stretched on, the world outside their bubble began to stir. The sun rose, the hospital woke up, and people started to notice that the chief of ethics and the head of transplant surgery had gone rogue. The first call came to Eve's cell phone, which she had left with her assistant. It was the hospital's CEO, his voice a mixture of confusion and fury. The rumors were flying. The board was in an uproar. Eve had instructed her assistant to say only that she was in a critical, ongoing consultation. It was a stalling tactic, and she knew it wouldn't last long. The real trouble began when the preliminary lab results from the donor's extensive tests started to come back. One by one, the major threats, HIV, hepatitis, CMV, came back negative. A collective silent sigh of relief went through the OR. But the full viral panel would take hours more. They were still flying blind. It was in the 5th hour of the surgery, as Sam was painstakingly attaching the new heart's aorta to coax it into beating on its own, a tense, breathless silence fell over the room. Eve held her breath, her own heart seeming to beat in time with the monitor. Come on, Lily, she thought, her hands pressed so hard against the glass they ached. Come on. The monitor showed a flicker, a single weak electrical impulse, then another, and another. The weak, sporadic blips slowly, miraculously began to organize themselves into a steady, rhythmic pulse. The new heart was beating. It was working. A wave of relief, so profound it was almost painful, washed over Eve. She felt her knees go weak. Below, she saw Sam step back from the table, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of pure, unadulterated exhaustion and triumph. He had done it! They had done it! He looked up then, his gaze finding hers through the glass. His face was hidden behind his surgical mask, but his eyes, tired but shining, conveyed everything. It was a look of shared victory, of a bond forged in the crucible of an impossible night. But their victory was short-lived. As the surgical team began the long process of closing, Henderson stepped up behind Eve, his voice a low, cold promise. As soon as that child is stable,
he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You are both fired, and I will personally see to it that you never practice medicine in this country again." The longest night was over, but the fight for their futures had just begun.
The 2 weeks following the surgery were a blur of official proceedings. Lily, against all odds, was recovering. Her new heart was strong, and the final exhaustive tests on the donor had all come back clean. Their gamble had paid off in the most spectacular way possible. They had saved a child's life. It didn't matter. They were heroes to Lily's family, but to the hospital board, they were liabilities. As Henderson had promised, they were both brought before a disciplinary committee. The hearing was a formality, its outcome preordained. Eve, with her characteristic precision, presented her case. She did not make excuses. She took full responsibility for her decision to override the protocol, citing the extraordinary circumstances and the successful outcome. Sam, in turn, testified that he had acted solely under her direct authority, a calculated move on his part to shield himself and place the full weight of the decision on her, a final act of their conspiracy, designed to protect at least one of their careers. But the board was not interested in nuances. They were interested in making an example. Eve was stripped of her title as Chief of Ethics, and her contract was terminated, effective immediately. Sam, due to his near-mythical status as a surgeon and the legal shield Eve had provided, received a slightly lesser sentence, a formal reprimand, a 6-month suspension of his surgical privileges, and a permanent position on every low-level administrative committee the hospital could invent. They were grounding their cowboy, shackling him with the very bureaucracy he despised. They met that afternoon for the last time in the now empty office that had once been hers. She was packing her personal effects into a small cardboard box. "It's not fair," Sam said, his voice a low growl of frustration as he leaned against the doorframe. "I knew the consequences when I made the call," Eve said, her voice calm. She folded a framed diploma and placed it in the box. "I gave you a life raft. Don't worry about the conspiracy charge. Just take it. It was a price I was willing to pay." She looked at him. "You, on the other hand, a 6-month suspension and a lifetime of committee meetings? For a man like you, that might be a fate worse than getting fired." A wry smile, humorless, touched his lips. "They know how to punish a man. I'll give them that." An awkward silence fell between them. Their intense, life-altering partnership was over. They were about to be sent back to their separate, divergent orbits. "So what will you do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "After this, my reputation as an administrator is ruined. No major hospital will touch me." She taped the box shut. "Maybe I'll go back to clinical practice, work in a small clinic, somewhere the rules are a little less absolute." She looked at him, a flicker of a challenge in her eyes. "And you? Will you serve your time? Let them turn you into a bureaucrat?" He was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the sprawling hospital complex, the kingdom where he had once been a god. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about a conversation we had, about my brother, about the deal I made with Omnicorp." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "That debt, I've been paying it for 15 years, but watching what you were willing to risk for what you believed in, I realized I've been paying the wrong people." He took a step closer. "There are organizations, non-profits, that go into places the big hospitals won't touch, places with no rules, no committees, places that need cowboys." He was talking about leaving, about walking away from his prestigious career, from everything he had built. "It would mean starting over," she said softly. "I know. It's a high-risk, low-reward proposition, the kind of thing only a reckless fool would take on." He held her gaze, and the question was there, unspoken but hanging in the air between them, as real and as vital as a beating heart. Eve felt a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. The loss of her job, the end of her career as she knew it, it no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a liberation. "Well," she said, picking up her small box of belongings, "every reckless cowboy needs someone to manage the chaos, someone to protect him from the consequences of his own brilliance." His answering smile was the brightest she had ever seen. They walked out of the office and out of the hospital together. They didn't know where they were going. They had no plan, no safety net. All they had was a shared, hard-won belief that the most important rules aren't written in a protocol book. They are written in the moments when you choose to risk everything for a single, precious life, or for a shared, uncertain future. The cowboy and the bureaucrat were about to start a new kind of practice, and this time they would write the rules themselves.